Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from 2 Plus Tough, and this is another Start Collecting Box review redo, where essentially I take a Games Workshop Start Collecting Box for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. We're going to break it down, go unit by unit, what you get in the box, explore what those units do on the tabletop, and at the end of it talk about the actual value of the kit and how it kind of fits into the army as a whole. Now today we're going to be doing the Skaven Pestilens box, which is quite a bit of fun. And so let's talk about what comes in the set that you get. In the Start Collecting Skaven Pestilens box, you will receive one Plague Furnace, one Plague Claw Catapult, and a horde of 20 Plague Monks. Now, just kind of doing like a bird's eye view initially here, if you don't know, Skaven are traditionally a horde army. Lots of little guys that are there to support and kind of defend some really big heavy hitters. In this case, it is of course going to be the Plague Claw Catapult for ranged attacks, and then the what's it called? Oh my gosh, can't remember the name of these things. They have so many crazy names. Plague Furnace. I knew Plague was in there somewhere. The Plague Furnace is kind of your real punch as far as this list goes. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Skaven line will know that both the Plague Furnace and the Plague Claw Catapult have optional builds. That is the Warp Lightning Cannon and the Doom Bell, whatever. There's a bell ringing and there's a Grey Seer on top of it. I'm not really going to cover those, and here's the reason why. This is the only Skaven Start Collecting box that there is at the time of this video. And for that, it really truly is geared towards Pestilence stuff. Because of the way that Skaven works, where there are so many restrictions on what constitutes battle line, I really do think that the core value of this box, if you are starting out in Age of Sigmar, lean into Pestilence first. And then later, if they come out with a different box that has clan rats or something else that you can use as battle line, then the conversation changes. But for the value of this box, it is a lot more valuable if you go with Pestilence than anything else. And I say valuable simply because not monetarily, but I mean in terms of actually getting new players into the hobby and up and running with a functional list. Your battle line can be taken care of. Now that's a lot of preface to say. I'm going to focus on exactly what comes in the box as they describe it. And so let's go over and take a look at those War Scrolls. And as always, I like to kick this off with the heroes. And in this case, the Plague Furnace is actually, its full name is Plague Priest. That's the little Skaven on front there on a Plague Furnace. It counts as sort of being like a mount, as if it were. Now, every time you see this little star, remember I make these videos for newer folks if you're not familiar, this little star means you have to reference this damage table down here below. For these larger models, the really, really big ones, the more damage that they take, their profile kind of degrades. They get worse at things as time goes on and the battle rages, and they take all kinds of damage. Other little guys, they're either alive or dead, but only for the big stuff does this matter. So for example, we have a move with a star there. We're going to look down here at the damage table, compare how many wounds he has. He'll start the game with 0, obviously. He hasn't suffered anything, and he'll be able to move a full 6 inches. So that's an interesting idea there. I mean, as far as wargaming, if you're new to it, just kind of keep in mind, anytime you see a star, you're going to look at the damage table, go to the right profile based on, how many wounds they've suffered, and then kind of pick the number and fill it in where that little star is. But for the purposes of this review, I always start as if they had not suffered any wounds, right? When you first put your model on the table, what can it do when it's nothing but potential? As we said, he can move 6 inches. He has 13 wounds, which is pretty good for a rickety old wagon with an angry little Skaven guy on top of it. A 4-up save, which is probably the best save in this faction, and 10 bravery, simply because he's first of all a hero, but then also on this big construct that makes him feel all kinds of importance. And we're going to move into the melee weapons. He doesn't have any ranged attacks listed here, or at least profiles here. And the big one is the Plague Censer, okay? This is that big swinging like orb of grossness that the idea is the Plague Priest on a furnace is pushing that into battle so it can smash against the enemy. It is literally a giant hammer, okay? Has a 3-inch range for its attacks, which is phenomenal, okay? It says see opposite down below, so we're going to scroll down and look for that censer bearer here. And we see the Great Plague Censer here at the bottom. Do not use the attack sequence for an attack made with this model's Great Plague Censer. Instead, pick one enemy unit within 3 inches of this model and roll a dice. On a 2-up, that model suffers a number of mortal wounds equal to the Great Plague Censor's value shown on the damage table. That is amazing. If you can get him into combat, your opponent can't make you reroll successful hits, it can't modify your wounds, their armor save counts for nothing. You just get him there, and on a 2-up, we'll talk about how much damage it does. So again, starting as if there was no wounds, it's going to do d3 plus 4. That is to say, you roll a d3, okay, which is a d6 divided by 2 rounded up. So if you roll a 2 on your d6 dice, that counts as 1 in a d3. Just throwing that out there in case anybody doesn't know. But let's say you roll a 2 on your d3 plus 4 brings it to 6, and that is how that math works out. It can be a little swingy, but honestly, the flat plus numbers kind of take out some of the swinginess of it. Like, if he gets in there and just punches something full force, it's gonna hurt, even if he's on, his 3rd or 4th profile. Because, if you, again, that same number 2 on a d3 plus 2, 4 damage is nothing to sneeze at, especially when it's mortal wounds going straight through. So this guy is an absolute baller, but it gets better from there. You see, in addition to the big swinging crazy weapon he's got, the little plague priest on there can stab you with his warpstone tipped staff, has a 2-inch range, 1 attack, 4s to hit, 3s to wound, -1 rend, and d3 damage. I like to call this the old man stick because every wizard or necromancer or anything, it's always the same flippin' stat line of just like this. So I kind of associate that with old angry men who are wizards and that kind of thing. In addition, there are the foetid blades, because not only is the priest on here, but he's also got a little entourage of Skaven riding along who are stabbing at everybody around them. 6 attacks at a 1-inch range, 4s to hit, 4s to wound, no rend, no damage. They're just slaves who are kind of pushing this thing along and there to show up. Lastly is the rusty spikes. This is just the wheels around him. 1-inch range, d6 attack, so there is a little bit of craziness there. It could go really high, could go really low. To hit is a star. It starts at a 2-up, which is so good. It's just so good. Even on average, if you roll a 3, 2-up, it's awesome. A bunch of those are going to go through. To wound is a 3-up, -1 rend, and I love rend. If you've watched these videos, I wax poetically on how value rends brings to an army, and 1 damage. So that's it. That's the basic profile, and just from there, we can tell that this guy rocks. Okay, I love this model so much. Now we're going to scroll down because he gets even better when you look at the abilities. Starting off with Altar of the Horned Rat. Do not take battle shock tests for friendly Skaven-tied units while they're wholly within 13 inches of this model. So I can't understate, or overstate I should say, how important that is for this faction, because you see, Skaven are, like I said, a horde army. You have a bunch of little guys surrounding and protecting your big stuff. And so the idea that, you're basically rewarding yourself for taking a bunch of plague monks by saying, hey, anyone who's around me, you don't have to worry about battle shock. And in a faction where your models will evaporate like water or burn like paper, Skaven just die in droves, this really does matter. Having the Skaven Tide book has a myriad of ways to mitigate bravery. However, having it be so simple as just being near him is really nice. And we already went through the Great Plague Censor, so we're going to move over here to Noxious Prayers. In your hero face, this model can chant one of the following prayers. This is the priest on there. If it does so, pick one of the prayers and make a prayer roll by rolling a dice. On a 1, this model suffers 1 mortal wound, and the prayer is not answered. On a 2, the prayer is just ignored, and on a 3-up, it is answered, okay, and the effects go on. It's important to know, you cannot unbind prayers. They just happen or they don't. Typically for Chaos factions, if you roll a 1 on a prayer roll, you get hurt. Not as much for Order stuff, but it's kind of the price of glory for the Chaos power. So, you've picked a prayer, you've picked an enemy, let's go see what prayers he knows. Filth. If this prayer is answered, pick one friendly Clan's Pestilens unit wholly within 13 inches of this model. You can re-roll wound rolls for attacks made by that unit until your next hero phase. super good. I said this in my Fire Slayers Star Collecting Box review, is that anytime you're dealing with a Horde army, when you can have big sweeping effects like rerolls to a unit, when there are so many models in that unit, it just magnifies. You get so much more value than if it's like a 5-man unit. You know what I mean? So the more bodies you have, that math just grows exponentially. It's awesome. The second one is Rabid. If this prayer is answered, pick one from the Clan Pestilens unit wholly within 13 inches of this model. Add one to the attack's characteristic of melee weapons used by that unit until your next hero phase. You cannot pick the same unit to be affected by this prayer more than once per hero phase. However, keep in mind that if you have more than one of these plague sensor, the big old things, plague furnaces, I don't know why I keep forgetting that, you can have them both do each of the prayers on the same unit, right? The same unit can't receive the +1 to their melee attacks more than once, but they can receive any number of actual blessings and prayers and that kind of thing. So keep that in mind when we get to the Plague Monks. So he is automatically a great buff piece. He's a force multiplier. Your guys don't want to run away. They fight harder when he's near, and he's got the big 1-2 punch. Next up is the Poisonous Fumes. At the end of the combat phase, very important, put a note in exactly when this happens. It happens in both your combat phase and your opponent's during their turn. Roll 1 dice for each unit within 3 inches of any unit with this ability. On a 4-up, the unit being rolled for suffers 1 mortal wound. On a 6, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. So he is a unit that your opponent doesn't want to be near, right? Just the act of charging him forward and smashing into the opponent means that they will, at the end of the combat phase, if they don't delete him or withdraw, they're going to be taking some mortal wounds on a 4-up. And it is important to note, it kind of bleeds over here. Sorry, I kind of paused. This ability has no effect on Clan Pestilens units. So your guys who are surrounding him, hopefully doing the the no battle shock thing, they're not going to be affected by that. They're in tune. They're all about the poisonous fumes. Next up is Protection of the Horned Rat. Roll a dice each time you allocate a wound or mortal wound to this model. On a 5-up, the wound or mortal wound is negated. Again, lots of protection here. You want to keep him alive, so keep him surrounded, almost bubble wrapped is the term I like to use, as far as people getting to him. And honestly, being able to deflect, let's say primarily shooting attacks on a 5-up is pretty great. And I know you're thinking, Doug, this unit sounds incredibly good. It sounds way too good for this game. There is a caveat, and that last one is called Pushed into Battle, okay? This model cannot move unless it starts the move within 6 inches of 10 or more friendly Skaven Tide models. In addition, this model's Rusty Spikes have an attack characteristic of 2d6 instead of d6 if it makes a charge move in the same turn. Now, there's a lot of things to think about here. The obvious one is that you can't have the Plague Furnace just kind of out by itself. It has to be around other things to be able to move. So if you want him to move forward, if you want him to move that 6 inches, there have to be at least 10 friendly Skaven models nearby. However, keep in mind a few things. One, you're going to want models near this guy so that they don't take battle shock tests anyway, okay? So it's not really a big deal. Secondly, this is a Horde faction. Bodies are cheap, and you will have no problem finding 10 dudes around this guy. Remember, it's within 6 inches of this model, and this guy's on a huge base, okay? It's a big, big base. I just don't think it's ever going to be a problem. Thirdly, it's Skaven Tide models. It's not even Pestilens models, which means if he is standing next to our next topic, the Plague Claw Catapult, even though this crew is busy running a different war machine, it still counts as a Skaven Tide model to move him. Does it make sense? Nope, but it works and I like it. Where people think this is a big caveat, though, is that it's about positioning and timing. So for example, this model can't move unless it starts the move within 6 inches of 10 or more models. That means, ideally, you would want to have some Plague Monks behind him so that then he can move forward, and then the Plague Monks will then activate and move back behind him again, okay? So the idea here, what I'm really trying to stress is, don't necessarily count, how do I word this? It's all about model placement. you can very easily reach a point where if the 10 models that are pushing this guy are in front of him, when he goes to activate, either one, he's out of range, or two, he can't move further than them. They kind of clog up the alleyways for him. He is a huge base. Again, there's pros and cons to that, but in this case, what I'm talking about is the fact that he can easily get kind of blocked in corridors and tight passes through terrain because there's so many Skaven around you. Movement becomes kind of a pain. However, I will say, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I think that's a pretty small minus to go with all the pluses that this guy has. He's not a unique character. If you get the Skaven battletome, because I always start with new folks who, don't take on too much, just kind of build slowly, go with the War Scrolls, and then you can talk about the battletome additions to their rules. He gets more prayers. He gets all kinds of cool stuff. He can take artifacts. Like, there's so many cool things going on with the Plague Furnace that, honestly, having 10 dudes in a horde army around him is not a problem. And next we have the Plague Claw. Used to be called the Plague Claw Catapult. And it's just this guy shoveling slop. It only moves 3 inches because if you've seen the model, it is a rickety triangle that doesn't make any sense. You got 6 wounds, which is great for a little war machine, 5 up save, and 4 bravery. Now, these can be taken in units. You can have, I believe it's 1 to 3 per unit, if I'm not mistaken, which isn't a very compelling thing for, say, like a shooting battery from the back. They have a range of, their ranged attack is the actual catapult itself, and it has a range of 6 to 31 inches. If your enemy is under that, they're closer than 6 inches, you can't shoot them with the gun. Okay, it's a minimum range. However, if it's a large unit, let's say, 20 Free Guild Spearmen rush you, if any one of them is outside of that 6 inches, like let's say they come directly at you, one is, 4 inches away and the other one is 6.5, you can shoot that last guy. He's in range. Like, you can get him. You might be hosed the next turn when they charge into you, but you can get him. And what he hits him with is 1 attack, 3s to hit, 3s to wound, -2 rend is awesome. But the damage is D6. Now, D6 sounds so epic and so cool because you see that 6 and you're like, yeah, buddy. But the truth is, it's going to roll a 1 just as many times as it rolls a 6. So kind of, don't get upset if you roll a lower number. Just understand they're a swingy unit. They have high highs and low lows, but it all evens out in the end. I think if you just assume that you're going to do roughly 3 wounds, or 3 damage, I should say, it'll probably temper your expectations, right? I think that's pretty fair. For when they do, your opponent does get within melee range, which they do not want to be. You get the Rusty Knives. 1 inch range, D6 attacks, 5s to hit, 5s to wound, no rend, 1 damage. It's a sad, sad fight. However, you shouldn't really have any problem keeping it out of combat for the most part because of its awesome abilities. You see, Barrage of Disease is phenomenal. A Plague Claw Catapult can target enemy units that are not visible to the attacking model. In addition, add 1 to hit rolls and increase the damage characteristic to 2d6 for attacks made with Plague Claw Catapults if the target has 10 or more models. That is without question the singular best rule that a shooting unit can have in this game. I don't need line of sight, so if your opponent is within range, 6 to 31, and they're hiding behind a wall or a building or, any kind of terrain feature, you don't need to see them. You just need to be in range. And so you can target them because it's a catapult, it's kind of arcing up in the air and coming down on top of them. And that's only the first part. I mean, that enough is a phenomenal rule. Okay, let's just say that. The second part of it is the damage characteristic going to 2d6 if it has 10 or more models. These guys are shooting units that are really great at horde clearing. Again, it's still swingy in terms of the d6. It can just as easily be a 2 as it could be a 12, now that you're rolling 2d6. But the truth is, if you take more than one of these things, I truly do believe the math evens out in the end where you can be like, okay, you can reasonably expect good amounts of damage from a couple of Plague Claws on a chaff unit, a big unit that's just designed to take up space or hold an objective, something like that. Thin out the numbers. And along with that, they also have the ability Hideous Death, which is just, you get splashed by this nasty goo and you You just die and everyone feels bad for seeing you die that way. Subtract 1 from the bravery characteristic of a unit targeted by any Plague Claw catapults until the end of that turn. What's interesting is that it's targeted. You don't have to like hit, wound, or damage them. You just have to say, I'm going to shoot that guy. So it's a very interesting wording there. And it's totally fine. Honestly, subtract 1 from bravery is not that big of a deal. Anymore, there are a myriad of ways for armies to negate the idea of battle shock, of losing guys to it. However, there are some abilities from certain factions, like Daughters of Cain, where they compare their bravery to that of another unit, or where those kinds of modifiers become very important and relevant. Also, keep in mind that Daughters of Cain tends to be run as a horde army, meaning I think the Plague Claw catapult stock goes up in that faction. And lastly, we have probably the most important war scroll when it comes to the Plague Monks, okay? Or at least the clan's Pestilens, and that is the Plague Monks themselves. These are the guys you see running the machines and, shoveling slop into the catapult. So what does a unit of 20 of these guys look like? Let me give you the short answer. It's amazing, okay? These guys, I used to run them when I had my Skaven, and I love them. They are murder machines, but they do die if anything looks at them. I'll show you what I mean. We have a 6-inch move, 1 wound each, a 6-up save, so they're wearing, raggedy cloths, that's it, that's their only armor, and 5 bravery. So 5 bravery means if you do not do anything to mitigate their battle shock, which of course there are many ways to deal with in Skaven, I promise you that, they are all going to run away, because the second they get touched, these guys are gonna just poof. Now, these guys are armed with one of the 2 weapon options here, okay? They can have a pair of blades, which is 1-inch range, 2 attacks, 3s to hit, 4s to wound, no rend, 1 damage, or they can have a blade and a stave. Now, this math used to be different before their profile got redone. I actually like this more. It's much more user-friendly than all the complex junk that the last one had. But for the woe stave, which is the staff they can carry, it's a 2-inch range, 2 attacks, 4s to hit, 4s to wound, no rend, 1 damage. Essentially, you're making yourself hit less. It's 1 pip harder to hit, but you get 2-inch range. And we'll talk about the merits of each of those when we cover what they do in the ability section. So we're going to put a pin in that, but just understand that the difference is essentially you're trading at a hit value for an extra inch of range. Now, one model in this unit can be the Bringer of the Word. That model carries a Book of Woes. 1 in every 10 models can be a standard bearer, and while this unit includes any standard bearers, each time a model from this unit is slain by an attack made with a melee weapon, before the model is removed from play, roll a dice. On a 6, pick 1 enemy unit within 3 inches of the slain model, and that suffers a mortal wound. So if you're in combat, every time a Plague Monk dies, you roll a dice. And after any 6s means, boom, a unit within 3 inches, doesn't have to be the one who attacked him, but just a unit within 3 inches in melee range suffers a mortal wound. Think of that as a consolation prize. Again, it's on a 6, but like I said, they have a 6-up save. Like, guys are going to die the second you get into melee. And so, this will come up pretty regularly, especially if you're going full Pestilens, where it's just mountains and mountains of Plague Monks. So kind of keep that in mind. And the last little thing they have here is the Plague Harbinger, sort of like the little instrument that kind of, gets the troops excited. Add 1 to run and charge rolls for this unit, while it includes any Plague Harbinger. So huge, because these guys are made of paper. They want to get into combat very, very badly. So let's talk abilities. So we have the Book of Woe. This is kind of what the leader carries of the unit. In your hero phase, you can pick 1 enemy unit within 13 inches of the unit's Bringer of the Word and roll a dice. I'm going to pause there. So model placement for this guy is very important. There's no reason to not have him in front, okay? Where you can have that range, that 13 inches, be as long as possible, because you and Age of Sigmar get to pick which models you allocate damage to. Just take him from the back. So I'm just going to throw that out there. For him specifically, it matters very much. Whereas the Standard Bearer and the Plague Harbinger, they can be anywhere in the unit physically. It doesn't matter, as long as there is one there, they get those buffs. So that's all. But if he is there is a unit within 13 inches. Roll a dice, and on a 1 to 3, nothing happens. On a 4 through 5, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. On a 6, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds, and it has no effect on Nurgle units. Now, I'll be honest with you, a 50-50 shot of doing, doing a mortal wound, and then, a 14%, 6, unit of doing D3 mortal wounds is not super great, but here's the key, is that it doesn't say it's a one use only. It's just in your hero phase. And so you get the chance to do this for every Plague Monk's unit every single turn. So like I said, it's not so much about this singular ability being all amazing, it's that it will come up because just the sheer amount of dice that you are throwing at this math, you're going to do mortal wounds. The sad part is it has no effect on Nurgle units, which, Nurgle's not exactly rocking the world right now, but if you are a Pestilence player fighting Nurgle stuff, you're going to find that a couple times and you're going to be like, dang gummit, how come I can't use my disease on you? And so now we're going to talk about the abilities here. We're going to have a comparison discussion about the different melee weapon options. So we're going to start with this ability, the Foetid Weapons. If the unmodified wound roll for an attack made with a melee weapon by this unit is 6, that attack succeeds twice instead of once. Make a save roll for each weapon. Now that happens to both of them, okay? If your unmodified wound roll is 6, it explodes and becomes 2 attacks. That is terrific given the number of models in this unit that are going to be attacking. These guys are on the smallest bases possible. And then down below that is Frenzied Assault. Add 1 to the attacks characteristic of this unit's melee weapons if the unit made a charge move in the same turn. Again, all of these things apply to both weapon options, so why do I think that these factor into our decision making? Well, pretty simply, because they are on such small bases, if you take the Foetid Blade and Woe Stave, yes, they don't hit quite as well. Okay, straight up, I'm not going to argue that. The thing is, though, you can get literally double the number of attacks in, which it overwrites that as a negative, to be honest with you. Because if you charge with these guys and they have the staves, you're getting 2 inches worth of Plague Monks in, which is a lot of bodies. And all those bodies are throwing 2 attacks, 3 because you charged thanks to Frenzied Assault. That's more attacks that can hit. It's more attacks that have a chance to roll a 6 to wound, which is going to explode them back into making 2 hits each. And then when your opponent swings back at them, that's when all your other abilities trigger and it gets really fun, where all of a sudden now every time a guy dies, you roll a dice on a 6, they take a mortal wound, that kind of stuff. And so this is the thing. I think that the Woe Stave tends to be better because you just get more attacks in. If there was an option that was like, if you take the pair of blades, you get to re-roll wound rolls, in which case they would have something that would make you want to do that so that you can have, the exploding 6s there. That would be great, but it just doesn't. So that is my honest opinion. I think the Woe Staves are a bit better, but play what you want. And honestly, the thing is, these models are so tiny and quite frankly so samey. If you built it one way, don't worry about it. I would honestly just build a mix of them and just make sure it's extremely clear to your opponent which profile you're working with. And you can write it down, or if every unit in your army is the exact same, you know what I mean? Just make it clear. That's the biggest problems when it comes to people who don't do the exact model, that kind of stuff. It's just communication. Make sure your opponent knows. Okay, so let's have a talk about Skaven Pestilens. I freaking love this box. If you are someone who wants to get into Skaven, there's honestly probably better ways to go about it. It's a hard faction to get into, simply because the kits are kind of dispersed. Some of them are ancient. Some of them are really hard to find. Some of the Skaven models no longer have rules in the game, that kind of stuff. So there's just a lot of things going against new players playing Skaven. However, if you want to play Clans Pestilence, this is amazing. You can go by, 2? I mean, honestly, if I was going to jump right now into Pestilence, I'd buy 3 of these, because that would give me 3 catapults, which is, there's a battalion that uses 3 of them. It gives me my battle line of Plague Monks. It gives me, I can build maybe 2, I think I'd probably build 2 Plague Furnaces, and then third one have it be the Screaming Bell, because you can take a Grey Seer and as your general and still be Clan Pestilens, at which point you then have 2 priests doing all the prayers, super buffing a unit. It could get really nasty. What I will say about this army though, and this goes for this box set as well as like just people getting into Skaven Pestilens in general, is they are, if you imagine like a candle, right, that burns super, super bright, it is devastating as an army when it goes into attack. That initial wave when you punch your opponent with the Plague Furnace and all these Plague Monks that are getting, you know, spiked and exploding attacks and all that kind of stuff, you really need to cripple your opponent's army, because the second they swing back, you are going to lose a lot of your oomph, so to speak. Because the minute your bodies start drying up and you start dying, well, all of a sudden now your Plague Furnaces can't move, and you have no one to hold objectives and all these things. It falls apart if you don't cripple your opponent with that first punch. If you go against someone who can grind you down, which is admittedly, you know, if you throw enough dice at anything, it's kind of hard to do. But if you do, like, it is a brutal game and you'll lose every time. So kind of keep that in mind. They also have limited to no range support. I mean, the catapult's there, but it's not a super shooty unit. You only get 1 shot. So there's a lot going on. All in all, for folks who are going to build a Pestilens army, right there now, right, you have the 3 units here. This makes up just about the entire bulk of your army, okay? There are some more elite Plague Monk style guys, but honestly, they're not great. And when I say they're not great, I'm not even talking from a competitive standpoint. They just kind of don't do anything different than Plague Monks already do, and they're like, I think in metal or resin, so skip them. I just mean like from a sense of even like lore and that kind of stuff, they don't really add anything to the army. It's kind of just like, oh yeah, and these guys are here, which you're like, okay, cool. But as far as like actually playing Pestilens, buy 3 of these and then just keep buying more Plague Monks to stock up your units. One day I do hope that Games Workshop comes out with a different Start Collecting box specifically for Skaven. We haven't seen a new box in quite a while now, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but I'd love to see it, because something that can get you into Skaven as a whole with clan rats and maybe some, what are they called? The Grey Seers on foot, that kind of stuff, you know, it would be a lot of fun. So I would love that. If you are a Pestilens player, first of all, good job. You rock. In the comments down below, tell us, 1, how many of these boxes would you buy? And 2, what else would you, you know, kind of caution people, equip them with knowledge, prep people for what to expect when they're playing this army. So friends, thank you all so much, and happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.